Hi, Masheika. Welcome to the AIML show. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. This is pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I've been following you on LinkedIn, and I know that's how we met virtually, but your work is very inspirational, especially when you talk about things that people are hesitant to talk about in the world of ethical AI. So today I want to cover a few things, your career journey. It's very inspirational to all of us. And then we'll talk a little bit about ethical AI, the risk to organizations, if that's good with you.
That sounds great.
So let's start off. You said from your LinkedIn profile that you made a career pivot about a decade back. Talk to me a little bit about where did that thought come from and what are the possibilities you were thinking about?
Uh, okay. Yeah, it all sounds cool now in retrospect, but at the time it was fraught with stress and a lot of difficulty. I trained to be an attorney. I wanted to be a lawyer my whole life. I saw To Kill a Mockingbird in the third grade and was like, I want to help people, and
Wow.
spent my entire educational time thinking I was going to be an attorney. Went and got several degrees. I actually wanted to be a law professor.
Mm-hmm.
But after I got my third degree, my parents made it very clear that I need to get a job and not
Mm-hmm.
go and get that PhD. So I practiced law for a while. The business of the law is very different than the profession of the law, and it's particularly in states like Florida. So I ended up just in some moral conundrums that it wasn't the life that I wanted to live. Um, so I ended up leaving the law, which was difficult. I was working as an online teacher in Savannah, Georgia, just kind of like at the lowest of the low. And I looked at my book. I was teaching government white collar criminal law. And I looked at my book and it was written by sociologists. And I was like, lawyers don't like business. Businessmen don't like law. Maybe I can work in that intersection. So went
Mm-hmm.
back and got a degree in international business, did an internship for a hologram startup out of a out of an incubator at Edinburgh University, doing international marketing. Started doing some coding for the website. Always liked tech, always loved tech. Decided I need to get into tech. That is not a straight path,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a state like Florida. So
Mm-hmm.
after a couple of years of beating my head up against it, I just packed up and moved to California. Sight
Wow.
unseen, was in San Francisco, just papering the town, trying to find a job. Ended up with a contract job at Google, um, with a vendor at the time, which was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty awesome. And then ended up kind of moving, contract, moving from job to job, trying to move up. Eventually landed at NVIDIA, basically found a home there, was converted to full time. And that's how I ended up in tech. And as I was working at NVIDIA, I got to kind of a point in my career where I kind of hated my job a little. When I hate my job, I learn. So
Mm-hmm.
I read a book on Claude Shannon called Mind at Play. He was the founder of the information age. Started thinking about, well, how does that play with law?
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at AI ethics from that perspective. Spent a year at NVIDIA learning from the best of the best and the smartest of the smartest.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, try to move NVIDIA into an ethical direction with AI. Didn't quite work out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I ended up starting my own firm. So it was a very roundabout journey, but I had, a goal in mind that I wanted a career that I could be ethical, and that would be the hallmark of what I did. It's why I went into law. It didn't work out in law, but it's what I've always wanted to do. It's been my kind of guiding star, and I love education, which is a lot of what my company does now. So it's you stop and start, but at some
Mm-hmm.
point you realize all of that career path along that journey kind of helps you when you get to where you need to be.
Wow, what an amazing story. And so many truth bombs over there. You mentioned about inspired by To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm a huge the fan of the book. And what's interesting is I read the book when I was in India. And
Mm,
and I had obviously I did the law in India is very different. We do not have a jury system even.
Right.
That was long back removed and so on. And I've been a career technologist. And most recently, when I look at interesting use cases and I look at somebody like, the lady who leads the World Economic Forum AI practice,
Mm.
she comes from a law background, and I see a lot of lawyers getting into the world of ethical AI because it is, I think, a good marriage because you understand the legalities. You mentioned something that I did not understand. You said the business and the profession of law is different. What do you mean by that?
The profession of law is what you learn in To Kill a Mockingbird. It is the idea that we are here to basically be a brace against bad actors and to protect people who can't protect themselves. That is the profession. That is what we aspire to. That's what our oaths are about. The business of law is people trying to make a lot of money, and the focus is not on the customer. The focus is on themselves, and so it becomes more like mechanics.
Mhm.
People who are in a position where they know the tech and you don't, and so they can tell you a whole bunch of things that don't really need to be done or don't take that long and charge you whatever because you don't know. And so I
Mhm.
ran into a lot of that. Practicing law is people
Mhm.
who were more concerned with the making the money than actually aspiring to the ideals of the profession. And yeah, there are people who have not had that difficulty, but I just kept ending up in those places, and it's not what I want to be as a person. Money's great. I mean, you need it clearly. When I didn't have it, it was pretty desperate. But it wasn't my focus. It wasn't why I was doing what I was doing. So
Mhm.
it's a difficult decision to turn away money to do what's important to you. But
Right.
what's important to me has always been my focus, and money is how I live the life I want. But my purpose is what makes me want to live this life.
That's amazing quotable quote out there that you just said. But it's very interesting you mentioned that because a lot of what is happening in technology is somewhat a little bit parallel, right? Because
Yeah.
you are in the Valley area, so you understand that a lot of startups, yes, they might solve a problem, but ultimately, the goal is exit strategy, right? What is your
Yeah.
exit strategy? Are you getting acquired or IPO? So if the measurement is money, then is your goal to help people lost on the way is the question, which
Yeah.
seems to be the focus of all ethical AI discussions about platforms and so on. So tell me a little bit about how do you approach organizations about the conversation around ethical outcomes of AI? Because as a practicing data scientist, that is not given enough importance. In fact, I have to emphasize every day, let's go back to the mission and goal of what you're trying to achieve. No, people want to run their hands on the data and machine learning as soon as possible, right? So tell me a little bit about how do you approach organizations about this very crucial conversation we need to have.
Yeah. So there's a disconnect between let's say startups and the already established corporations, right? Established corporations are the ones that you tend to hear about in the news because they don't want to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So approaching them is really going to be an issue of once we get legislation and they're
Mm-hmm.
required to do some things, or the legislation is coming down the pike and they know they're required to do some things, that will loosen up the area for them to have the conversations they don't want to have. Basically, what I see at this point amongst those orgs is kind of like a money grab. They know the rules are coming and they're trying to get the last bit of cash they can before they're required to do what's right. It's once again, it's that business versus professional, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing in the middle mid-size to startup is more of a, we want to create something over time that is better. So yeah, you've got those people who are just looking at exit strategy, and they try to get you to come in at the last second and kind of sign off on what they've already done. A lot of us, a true AI ethicist is not going to jump into that. But
Mm-hmm.
there are there's a growing number who really want to build ethically from the start, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of make it part of their foundation. And
Mm-hmm.
for them, it's more of an understanding that you have to look at AI as a system, right?
Mm-hmm.
the tech itself is a tool, right?
Mhm.
But it's part of an overall system. And when you
Right.
focus on the tech itself and then try to find ways to use the tech, um, and you forget that, this tech is not going to exist in a vacuum.
Mhm.
You've got hardware requirements that are going to be around it. Can you meet those? Like, these are just fundamental things. Like, Google had a health product that they put out in a country that didn't have good, like, Wi-Fi or really good connectivity. They tested it in the lab and it needed to be connected all the time, but it never concerned them. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, it's great and it works. Then they put it out in the field and there's no connectivity and people have to wait. And it actually causes more problems than it solves, because
Mhm.
we can go through this manually quicker than trying to wait on the connectivity, right? So
Mhm.
that kind of thing, just in your product development, you need to concern yourself with it as a system. And then, when you're thinking of ethically, well, you need to figure out, how does this hit your society? How does it
Mhm.
hit the community, as opposed to, this is a cool thing that does a thing. Yeah,
Mhm.
but does it replace something that society needs, or does it actually replace something that they want? Like, every efficiency isn't what we want necessarily. It doesn't help our society grow. So you kind of have to sometimes swallow your business side,
Mhm.
and that's a difficult thing. So companies that are willing to do it, it's great, but it's trying to reach people who are really business focused and money focused, and telling them that, this is short-term money. You're not going to make long-term gain, and you may lose, what bit of, um, you know um, you know reputation and
Mhm.
momentum you had in the community, if you're too short-term focused. And
Mhm.
that's a cultural issue. Um, Everyone's sitting home over COVID, and learning that life is bigger than their jobs has helped with that transition.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's a cultural issue in the States. There's a desperation here that people outside of the US don't necessarily see, and don't recognize that that's what drives a lot of this money focus here.
Mhm.
Um, so, some of the political changes that have given us a safety net here has created space for people to look at quality of life, and, the ramifications of their actions in a different way, which is why you see people finally standing up for things that are really important. When I shouldn't say finally, but people standing up for things that are really important, both in the tech space and the social sphere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what do you have to say in that context about the facial recognition systems of platforms like Amazon, bringing it down and making it unavailable? Is that is that a temporary holding pattern? What do you think about that?
Well, when I was at NVIDIA, I worked with Anima Ananda Kumar. I'm not exactly sure I'm saying her last name right. I always said her first name, but
Yes.
she was part of the group that was speaking out about facial recognition. That long list of scientists who wrote an open paper, when it first, I guess that was two years ago,
Mm-hmm.
or 3 years ago. And so I learned a lot from her about the
Mm-hmm.
tech at the time. Um, I don't think it's a blip. I think it's an issue of education and communities. So when you look at Joy Bulawami's work, and
Mm-hmm.
what she did in Coded Bias, when you look at how she brought in community individuals, and worked with them and brought that to the forefront in front of Congress,
Mm-hmm.
that is changing the dialogue. So
Mm-hmm.
it would have been just a small techie thing, but people have seen what video does. How, when people were at protests, how the policing forces used that kind of technology, and it changed. It opened it into the social structure, so we now understand it as a whole, as a culture,
Mm-hmm.
and so it changed how people thought about it. So that's why education, I think, is so important for AI ethics, because
Mm-hmm.
society needs to understand what's going on so that
Right.
we can have these conversations and actually create change. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a short-term thing, because there is a general knowledge about it. I think other things may be short-term gains if we can't get the general public to understand, the impact on their daily lives.
Awesome. And then there are a lot of ethical AI frameworks. I've been part of one for the US federal government here. So what is your take on these frameworks? I feel like there are a lot of frameworks. There is an inventory of over 100 frameworks from all over the world. Despite that, we do not see the operational conversation about ethical outcomes of AI systems. So what do you have to say about that?
I mean, I think, can you still hear me? Because my
Yep,
battery's died.
yep, I can.
It was good in theory, but the reality is if you don't have the laws behind it, corporations are going to do what's best for their bottom lines to start. And so I think it goes the same way as auditing. Like all these things sound great, but you need laws to push people to do what needs to happen. That's just the corporate way in the US. People don't do things because they're best for society. They do them because society mandates them, and we mandate them through the law.
That's interesting coming from a lawyer, because a lot of things we expect, whether it's platform companies or non-technology companies, to uphold the coherence of society and not, push it in another way.
No,
But what
that
do you
was
say
marketing.
about organizations that are not technology companies, like Johnson and Johnson or any pharmaceutical companies? What do they have? How do they evaluate ethical AI?
They're still technology companies. Like basically every company is a technology company at this point. Like that's just the nature of it. I think it's the same kind of thing. It's you have to look at, the social impact. If within the company, like that is their goal, their focus. But once again, you need laws and legislation to push them to make sure that they do it. I mean, you can't rely on the kindness of others when you get into a corporate setting. It's just not feasible. In the U.S., if you look at our history, when we went through the industrial age, you had individual people. Hershey actually created the FDA or pushed for the FDA because people were putting all kind of whatever in food because they wanted to make it cheaper and make money off of it. And you couldn't rely on people being good people. You had to create an organization that would go through and check and see if your food, the labels match the food. That's how it has always been in this country. And so we keep every generation thinking, oh no, people will do the right thing. And every generation we're proving wrong. And you need rules and regulations in order to set, the mandates and the basic structure of things. And then people can do better. Those who would do better will do better, but you have to create a floor of baseline behavior so that the bad actors can't go below that. And then the good
Mm-hmm.
actors are always going to do more.
Right. But you gave some food for thought for me, because I'm sitting in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., working on some government use cases. So there is a bridge that needs to be crossed in order to set up this legislation. And we saw Joyce, testimonial with the Congress and so on. But that bridge, to me, sitting here in DC, where I'm having conversations with policymakers and others, seems to be a long one. How do we close that gap? How do we educate our legislators to make the law when they don't feel that they have enough know-how about the technology? And we saw a use case of the questioning of Mark Zuckerberg, right? It
Yeah.
looked like they did not understand what their
Yeah.
business model of Facebook is. So how can, and this might be a selfish question, how can me as a technologist associated here in DC help to bridge that gap? You are a lawyer, so maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Well, actually, my path is really the educational path, right? I think the difficulty is we make tech seem so complicated.
Mm-hmm,
When we go to talk to people about tech, when we talk about neural networks and weighting and activation functions, and
mm-hmm,
people's eyes glaze. None of that
mm-hmm.
is necessary to do these
Correct.
kinds of jobs, right? And so part of what I'm doing with Ally is we're creating just foundational AI courses and AI for educators, AI for procurement officers, AI for healthcare administrators, which just explains AI from a basic standpoint of this is what an algorithm is.
Mm-hmm,
And this is how algorithms become neural networks, and
mm-hmm,
neural networks become models. And
mm-hmm,
models perform these kind of tasks. And you
mm-hmm,
put them together in order to perform, these kinds of or create these kinds of applications. Like that kind of knowledge is really what you need. You don't need to
mm-hmm.
know, the ins and out of how a neural network and binary coding, none of that is necessary. But technologists always approach it from a techie point of view. And oh, you can't understand the tech if you don't know how to code. That's just fundamentally not. correct.
No,
It's just not true.
understood.
And so we need, I think it's the ethicist place to, create more education that is just fundamental. This is how the tech works in the way that Joy did, and
Mhm.
explain to people in a way that's just, knowledge. We need general AI literacy within the world and within our communities so that
Right.
we as just normal citizens are informed enough to vote on something or to say, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want this in my neighborhood. I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to know how to code to understand that
Mm-hmm.
facial recognition is a problem or that
Correct.
decision making around unemployment by an AI system may be a problem,
Mm-hmm.
or who goes to jail and who doesn't. Like I don't need deep technical knowledge for that. I just need to understand fundamentally how the tech works and how it moves in society. So I think that's how you bridge that gap is start creating education to make a generally AI literate society. If we all have a base level understanding of the tech, then it puts us in a position to make these kind of decisions without always feeling, this knowledge gap.
Awesome. You're preaching to the choir here because I demystify technology and make it as simple as possible, or at least I try to. But I am with you and education, spreading awareness. And so, just like you said, the FDA has labeling. At some point, maybe we need labeling for AI systems used in criminal justice, and not necessarily is a good thing. So awesome. I love that. So the last question I want is, I know AI ethicist as a profession has come about in the last couple of years. And a lot of people like you might have legal background or might have a background of philosophy, neuroscience, who are interested to know how to pivot into a career. Yours was not a linear path. It had its twists and turns. So what advice would you have for them to pivot into a career of an AI ethicist?
Well, I will say AI ethicist isn't like a real career yet. It's a it's a goal and it's who we are. But I wouldn't say that it's like you can walk into a job and get an AI ethicist position, right? Um, uh, it's it's something that we aspire to create as a position, but I think once again that's a regulatory thing before we get to there. But I think getting into responsible AI and creating AI and helping companies create better AI or informing people about AI, I read like incessantly. I
Mm-hmm.
wake up every morning. I get on Medium a list of articles every morning that are, tagged for AI or technology in some way,
Mm-hmm.
and I read everything. I on my LinkedIn have um, actively recruited people onto my LinkedIn who post different articles and go to different sessions that I may be interested in. I go to
Mm-hmm.
conferences. I joined the IEEE.
Mm-hmm.
I do as much as I can to fully immerse myself in the
Mm-hmm.
area. And I think that's really what it is. I did on LinkedIn, I took some foundational AI courses that were kind of coding related and tech related because I did want to understand the details of the tech so that I could have both sides. I understood the social aspect, I understood the tech aspect, and then I had credibility from all sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be willing to read long and boring statistics papers and and
Yep.
and pull out the data that you need.
Mm-hmm.
So fundamentally, you have to understand statistics. You do need to take those courses and get that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way around that math. You do need to know
Mm-hmm.
that. But it's really an issue of, are you willing to put in the work? And if you are, most of what a lot of the work I did was I was still working at NVIDIA. Like this was like my side job in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But you're gonna have to, get the credentials and the credibility, while you're still making money, and then, try to pivot from there. So it's fine to do it as part of your career. It's just really about, are you willing to put in the work to become the
Mm-hmm.
expert that you need to be?
Awesome. On that note, thank you so much, Masheika, for your advice and very wonderful interview with you. I hope you make inroads into bridging that gap and spreading education and awareness. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You too. Bye.
Bye.